All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the 22 Show by SaaS 22. To those of you who are new to the show, the 22 Show is where we bring on leaders from the world of SaaS, AI, technology, and partnerships. Today, we have with us here Alex. Alex is someone who I first crossed paths with quite some time ago when I was at Freshworks, and then more recently at SaaSter, where Alex and his team have been cooking up something really interesting in the GTM space. So we thought, who better to bring on to talk about what's really cooking in GTM? How are SaaS companies viewing GTM in 2025 and beyond than Alex? So over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey of how you got here?
Very good. Nice to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak a little bit about what we're doing and how we think about GTM and where GTM is heading. I think it's a very, very interesting space at the moment because it definitely turns some stones. And so let's see where the conversation goes. I've been in the SaaS space for the last plus 15 years. Although I didn't know that I want to be here. So actually, I studied music production and music management
Wow.
and thought that this is a good career, and then somehow stumbled into the backyards of Berlin into an IT company. And this is where my journey began. Spent a couple of years there, then had my first startup journey where we invested, where we raised around. I was not the founder back then, which was very good because I was on the sidelines and being able to learn without carrying the burden of all of it. And so did partnerships there, which was very interesting because it was very early innings of what we now call AI and machine learning.
Hmm.
Basically, it was taking algorithms that were developed for Deutsche Bank and Dresdner Bank and use them to optimize performance channels, paid ads, Google AdWords, Yandex Direct, and Facebook, and all the Amazon display markets didn't exist back then. Then I spent a couple of years in Africa because a friend asked me whether I would like to lead e-commerce in Africa, and was like, yeah, sure, why not? These are things that only come around once in a lifetime. You don't say no to it. Spent some time in Africa and then joined Freshworks in 2016, where I first built the professional services team and then built a big part of the partnerships program, specifically focused around system integrators, GSIs, SIs, boutique partners. Did this for a while, 8 years to be specific, which was very interesting because we saw Freshworks growing from 45 million to 500 million. Obviously, there was the IPO and all the preparation that comes with it. And then 2 years ago, I moved to Australia. My wife is Australian. She said, I'm sick of Berlin. It's gray, it's gloomy, it's dark, it's cold. I know a place that is warm and has a beach. So we ended up here. And around a year ago, we founded Agentic.
Wonderful. Now, I always knew you as someone who wears many hats, but as someone who probably studied music producing was something I did not know. So that is
There
super
you go.
fascinating. I'll probably come back to that in the end when I have a couple of fun questions. But let's talk about agentic now. It's something you've been dabbling in for quite the last couple of years now,
Yeah.
and would love to know from you what you've done so far and also, very curiously, why the name Agentic?
Okay, so the name Agentic, it was one of those late nights where I thought, okay, we need to get stuff done and we need to get the website going when we started. And so I was looking for URLs, and basically agentic.it was available. And I said, okay, then the company is now Agentic Company. That is the whole backstory of how we came up with the name. Somehow, sometimes those decisions that are in the dark hours on the couch are the ones that drive then conversations forward, because I can tell you Agentic Company as a company name has opened a lot of conversations even at SaaSter. So there was no real logic behind it, but it worked. What do we do? So with Agentic Company, we're a full stack GTM engineering as a service company. What does this mean? We provide advisory services, consulting services, and professional services companies to B2B companies, specifically in the area of 5 million to 50 million ARR. That is because our main goal with our value proposition is to help companies and specific GTM teams automate their GTM. And now, our initial assessment was, or assumption was, that companies within the 5 million to 50 million ARR range, they will have a better understanding of their ICP, of their value proposition. They will have a better understanding of their market, and therefore it would have been easier to get to automate on GTM. Right. And for us, GTM is not just you build your top funnel, you have your closure, and then that's it with GTM. But for us, we think about GTM or go to market actually across the whole customer journey. So obviously it's your top funnel, inbound, outbound, it's your prospecting, but it's also your how do you provide value throughout the whole sales process, and how do you onboard your customers, and how do you continue to grow your customers? And so while we do provide strategy, we execute strategy, we implement a strategy, we implement the tools that are required to execute the strategy. So we're basically your extended arm for GTM teams. And especially with the new onset of tools, there's a lot of talk about the clays of this world with data enrichment, how do you use signals. We have also built our own mental frameworks and models. We call it GTM OS, so our own operating system for go-to-market. And we use these models to analyze customer data, to analyze data across different channels, social, email, calls, and then provide the right intelligence frameworks, the right tactics for the teams to do better, more efficient, scalable go-to-market, close better, faster, and bigger.
That's really fascinating, given I know the size of your operations, but if you are actually able to go into that depth with the companies that you work with, I'm sure it's quite something. And that's something we will dive into probably a little later in this conversation. But to talk about what we're here for today, which is what does GTM in 2025 and really beyond look like, let's dial a bit back. So one thing that is a bit of a broad question here is forget AI, forget everything else. What do you really define as GTM for a B2B SaaS company? Let's take it from there.
Interesting. So, and I think it's a good question because even for us, when we talk about GTM, like obviously there's a lot of heat around, how is AI helping? And it will make it all better. And we always say, hold your horses because let's figure out the basics, right? And I think ultimately good go-to-market is understanding who are the users and therefore potential customers who are willing to pay for the value you provide within the scope of your product. And I think this is very important because I've been working with a lot of startups over the last 5 to 10 years. I'm an angel investor myself. I worked with Techstars and some other accelerators here in the ANZ region. And there's a lot of drive to go either to revenue quickly or build a product without talking to customers or potential customers. And when you think about the early stage of companies, because I think GTM changes depending on the stage you're at and the product maturity, right? And so when you are early, then your go-to-market should be finding a problem statement that is big enough that you have good and strong hypothesis around, and then you should test these hypotheses. And this means talking to potential clients, talking to potential users, both on the buyer side and as well user side. So this is good go-to-market for kind of pre-seed and seed, and then obviously have a lot of iterations on how do you position that. Then when you grow, I think it's very important to understand how can you find more of the same. And this is not always easy if you especially don't know who's the same. So I'm not even talking about ICP as such, but I'm talking about what is your active customer profile? And this then there might still be a gap between what we call active customer profile, ACP, and your ideal ICP, because your product has to evolve. But nevertheless, you're trying to bring in some repeatability in the process that you can then measure and that you can then later on scale. And that is iterative testing, especially now in the world of AI. It means not sending out 5,000 messages and see what sticks to the wall, but do what we call cohort testing, run smaller cohorts with different hypotheses, almost A/B test them against each other, and then iteratively improve and extend your market reach. And then the last part, when it comes to scaling, these are bigger companies, is how can you define processes that actually work? How can you enable your team to understand these processes? And once you have something that is repeatable, you can automate it. Because I believe that AI is very good amplifying both what works well, right? And it's very good amplifying the things that aren't really going well. You want to find the things out that don't work before you put a lot of AI on top of that.
This is wonderful perspective because I, as a marketer, when I think about GTM, I'm really thinking about it in the moment. But I think you, as someone who's been through companies of different sizes and probably consults with companies of different sizes across the spectrum, this kind of a phased view or a perspective is something that I'm gonna go back and think about. One of the things that we always think about is putting some kind of metrics to measuring your entire progress through your GTM journey. So let's double click on this phased approach that you put to GTM and say what are the metrics that you would look at across these different phases of every startup's journey.
Okay. So for us, I must admit, it's still a little bit of let me pull it or put it in a testing phase, because obviously again, even for us, there are assumptions of what works well. But if I look at, again, early stage companies, it's pre-seed to up to Series A, where you might not have customers or not that many, then I think it's how many are willing to use and willing to pay an amount of money. I always defer from the LOIs of this world when companies come to me or to investors we work with, and they say we have 20 LOIs and we have our ICP. And like, well, it doesn't matter unless they sign. So you want to understand how quickly can you provide value, and are people actually willing to pay for it? And in early stages, it might be a product, it might be services with product, it doesn't matter. But you should still be able to generate some sort of revenue. And with that is, how is your user retention? How active are the users? How often do they come back? And is there really the output that you can provide? How quickly can you onboard them? And I think depending on whether you're more in the mid-market and enterprise sector or more a PLG sector, I think acquisition costs and costs to go live are at least something to look out for and not totally dismiss. Then you go into Series A and until probably Series B and Series C. And here you start to look into your typical customer acquisition costs. I don't think you're at the point where you can actually think about the LTV ratios, because you might not have a lifetime yet. You might not have seen that. You want to look into churn, and you might want to slowly start looking into how efficient are your sales reps, and how quickly can you build processes where you can onboard your GTM sales team. Net retention, I think, is a classical one that will not go away. Your churn will not go away. You need to have an eye on that. And I think it will become increasingly interesting to understand the health score, activity scores of your users. And I can tell you, for the last 10 years, this 15 years, that it has always been a problem for customer success to understand, are people using it? What are you using? How are they using it? And I think nowadays we're finally at a point where we have enough entry points to check data and build easy to get data pipelines to really figure out what's happening post signature. But then at the end of the day, to be honest, we're all building companies, and that means your revenue has to grow, and you need to understand where it's growing and why it's growing, and you also need to understand why people are leaving you, because this gap, the better this gap, more efficient this gap, the better your company will be.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of growth, both of us were at SaaSter, and there were a lot of conversations around horizontal SaaS, around vertical SaaS, and clearly, there are sides to both. There were endless debates happening on both sides of the equation. So, if somebody was considering starting up today, what do you think their journey in their company's evolution should be in a sort of vertical or a horizontal kind of way?
I think if there is a founder who has either an absolutely in-depth understanding of a vertical industry, end to end, then you definitely have a good chance to build something big and something sustainable. Because if you think about it, right? So horizontal means you kind of you can do everything but nothing really. And I think technology always starts at this layer where it can't go deep enough because the infrastructure to go deep within a vertical industry has to evolve. And the further you go into the industry, the more complex it becomes, the longer it takes for technology to take shape, for the right infrastructure to be there. If you think about, even Slice, who builds the verticalized solutions for pizza shops all
Right.
over US, right? And they're growing absolutely crazy. There's almost no competition because they understood what these shops needs, from the boxes to how they measure the price of a pizza, et cetera, et cetera. So no Shopify can do that. But I think it's a function of suddenly every pizza shop can have a display, does have a phone, does have an internet connection. I think a horizontal play is still very much there. Look at Notion. It's not that they've been in the game for 25 years. And I think they were very good to understand their people don't want to use Microsoft Office. People don't want to use necessarily Google because it's not the best. And they were able to provide value for people who just want to write and work with content and context and data. Now, how will they go into deep verticals? Because this is where you can charge higher prices. We'll see.
Right. And another thing that I've seen, a bit of a personal observation, is especially with the rise of AI tools and micro SaaS and all of that, building in SaaS to an extent has become considerably easier. You can always correct me if I'm wrong. And as a result of which, there is a lot more competition, there are a lot more Me Too products. So, one of the ways, just either going horizontal or vertical aside, is also internationalization. So, when you think about a product going global, when in the GTM journey should a founder think about taking their product global?
Yeah, it's such a good question because there are so many opinions around that, and to be honest, I think it's opinions and depends on the product and the founder. Because number one, I think it takes a lot of balls to go international, right? And I think I'm a big believer of going global from day one if the product allows. And again, I think it's very important to understand that not all products are global from day one products. The bigger the hurdle to onboard, and this might mean because you're trying to solve really deep technical problems, the harder it is to go international. And so the product needs to support that. And then it is almost a no-brainer. Again, a Notion, it doesn't matter where you are because it's a easy sign up and off you
Yeah.
go, right? Same with ChatGPT or all the other models right now, because the hurdle to get on board, swipe your credit card is very, very low. It's a no-brainer. If you do something else, and I give you an example with Freshverse. I joined right when the company was moving from SMB into upper mid market and enterprise. And they wanted to move into bigger accounts in Europe. And so Europe is a classical pitfall market for, I think, a lot of US companies or other, because suddenly you have to deal with different languages. Suddenly you
Right.
have to deal with different currencies. Suddenly you have to deal with a different culture. And I think the culture aspect is something that continues to be very, very underserved and not understood, because people think, well, I've been doing big business in my market. Why can't I go to the Germans and sell the same? Or go to France and use the same approach, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you go mid market and enterprise, people buy from people. You need to build this connection, and you need to set up the structure, both in team, process, and product, to support exactly that. So it takes a lot of investment, and there the strategic decision to go into a different market, and even from Australia to the US, or from Australia to UK, or from US to UK. It's not only time difference, it's culture. It might be the same language. It's still a big, big step. And I think there you need to be very, very focused and then committed to do the step and do it right, and be ready to be ready for a ride, because it might not take 6 months, it might take 12 months or 24 months.
Got it. But no, I totally agree with you on going global from day one, especially if your product suits it, and a firm believer in that. I'm now going to move on to the next segment here, which is why we're here. So now we've kind of built the context with what is GTM, what are some of the metrics someone should look at when they are establishing a GTM strategy, to, what lane do they pick? But AI has come in and it's become, everyone calls it a game changer in so many different ways. And in some ways it has. But what's been your observation on how AI is reshaping GTM?
So there's my observation. And I think my observation right now mostly is that all of our inboxes are flooded with emails that say, hey, Alex, quick question. Hey, Alex, you got a minute, right? And I think, unfortunately, we are at a stage where I think we all get fed up with too many spam that are out of context and don't have the right content. And for me, it's a sign of, yes, early adoption, but wrong implementation. And so the ability of AI to transform GTM there is no doubt that it will happen, and it will have a very, very strong impact. I think, as always, we overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate what it can do in the long run. And so everybody 12 months ago said, in 12 months, there will be no SDR teams. And I'm like, yeah, sure, they're still there and nothing has changed really. What will happen is, and this is what we think should be happening, is to make the GTM team actually more intelligent. And I don't mean this in a bad way. I don't mean that sales reps are not smart and intelligent, but what we've been missing is the content and context for an account, for a persona, for a deal at a specific stage. And this means that often sales teams are unprepared. They don't know the account well. They don't understand the buying committees. They struggle with what is the next best action. They overlook objections that they might have, looked at, handled better, and maybe closed. And I think if AI can uncover the content and context, the information that might be in between the lines in conversations. This is where the real impact will come. And I think this is where AI can take or bring the science into the sales process, and the people can actually start building relationships, honest relationships, and basically be or execute the art of selling. And that's something, empathy, I think, is still something that AI is pretty far away from. If you wondered or not, they're getting better. Yeah, sure, absolutely. AI becomes very good at reading in between the lines. But again, I'm coming back to people buy from people, and that might not be that relevant for a PLG motion, because there I think we'll see a lot of products that are fully automated where you don't have to talk to anybody, and you don't want to talk to anybody because AI can do the support, can do the onboarding, can do your training, and can manage your objections and escalations, and you don't need a team for that. When it comes to mid-market and enterprise, you still will need teams, and I think there AI can really shine and bring a lot of value to both customers, prospects, as well as the sales teams.
Great. Now let's talk a little bit about the practical side of things. Now, poorly implemented AI SDRs that are, kind of causing spam in all of our inboxes aside, I'm sure as someone who talks to people daily, you would have probably been approached by companies that want to implement some kind of AI tools into their GTM processes, or maybe you've suggested some yourself. So, what are some of the common pitfalls that you have seen while this entire process has been underway?
Yeah, good question. So I think number one is that we treat AI as a magic box that, for whatever reason, can understand, build a strategy, execute a strategy, and with the only thing we provide is 2, 3 lines of natural language. And then we go back and say, you wouldn't onboard an employee and tell them, here is sales. Your goal is to build a strategy. This is the product. Go and look at the website, and I'll see you later. And so, what a lot of people underestimate is that, again, if there's no content and context, then AI cannot perform. And that content might be your documentation of a process, the understanding of what does good look like for AI to follow it and to build a workflow around this. What are good answers? What are the right answers? And a lot of companies didn't have it 10 years ago. They didn't have it 5 years ago. They still don't have it now. But they think that I just put an AI agent there and that will answer all my customer queries. If there's nothing to plug in, then even AI will struggle and will come with very generic answers. And generic is never really good. So that is one. The other part, I think, is implementing AI too early. And that might come from the perspective of, if you don't know your ICP, then having a fully automated enrichment to outreach campaign through Clay and AI SDR, or, pick your choice here, might actually be very dangerous. And I don't think a lot of that many don't understand how many contacts they're burning through, and over time decrease their conversion rates, their deliverabilities of emails. And this is definitely a negative impact there as well. So we always hold people back at this point and say, there's no reason to speed. There is no reason to be too quick. If we do tomorrow and learn something today, you'll still be better off than trying to plug every single problem with AI.
Absolutely, I fully relate to that. It's something I've been sort of practicing restraint with as well. As much as I love AI tools and I love playing around with them, putting them on the job is something I've been sort of very, very cautious about. And sort of brings me to the end of this interview where we move on to the fun segment. So thank you so much, Alex, for your time so far. Now, I remember starting off this interview with you mentioning that you studied music producing. Now, this is something that I've seen, and in fact was an airport conversation I was having with someone on my way to SaaSter. So there was someone who was sitting next to me on the flight for a brief period of time, and
Mhm.
they happen to be an AI music producer. So, as someone who studied this field, and as someone who probably dabbles in a little bit of AI for their day-to-day professional work, what's your take on AI in music?
So it's funny, I have actually a very little idea about what is happening in AI and music. And it's funny because I think about it, I'm like, well, AI, I want real music by real people. And it's when I started to produce music and we were sitting in studios and using, the latest Logic 8 and Pro Tools. So that's all digital music instruments. You could immediately tell that whether it's a real musician playing it or whether it's put in place by a computer. It just doesn't sound the right way. And I think with all the AI in the world at this point in time, we're getting increasingly close. But look at the videos, right? Look at the AI videos. There are still things where it's off, the light is off, the shades are off, the movements are off, and so it's great. It's great that things are developing. And I think from how do you regulate something like this? How do you make sure that artists still can be artists? Because there is a lot of great artists out there, but I much rather listen to real DJs and real music than to AI at this point in time.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm all for it. I mean, even though I listen to a lot of Spotify, I still have my vinyl records.
There you go.
So, yeah. But yeah, absolutely in agreement with you in terms of framework being put in place to make sure that artists still continue getting their fair due. And I think that that calls across the spectrum of AI, even when it
Yeah.
comes to beat. And now, and by the way, thank you so much for being an absolute spot for taking a question that was completely off script. This brings me to my absolute last and final question, where I love putting people on the hot seat. So I'm sure with all of your years of GTM experience behind you, there would have been some books, some movies, some podcasts, or some kind of reading material or courses that have shaped your journey in some critical points. So if you had to think of a top five, what would it
Okay. So it's not movies because I very, very rarely watch TV. Fortunately or unfortunately, the only time I watch TV and catch up with movies is actually on flights, and every flight from Australia is a long flight, so there's a lot of time to watch
Yeah.
TV. Um, but so I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and my absolute favorite podcast is actually Dr. Peter Attia, and it's health longevity. He is a ex-McKinsey's GP, has his own practice, but the way he can articulate, the way he can dissect problems, the way he goes into a lot of deep technical stuff and technical from a medical perspective, and still being able to have 2 3 hour conversations on podcasts, which I absolutely love. I don't like these 20 minutes. Here we go. So the longer the podcast, the better, at least in such topics. Really great because you learn a lot about life and us and there is no work, there is no GTN, there is no AI if we don't function. And I think especially if you're a founder or you work in a startup, then everybody heard it. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and so you need to take care of that. So Peter Attia, absolutely great person, and would definitely recommend it. A book that has actually shaped quite a lot of how I think is, I think it's called Our Brain at Work or Brain at Work by David Rock. And it's fairly easy to read. He's a neuroscientist. He wrote a couple of books, but this book in specific talks about how our brain operates in basic tones and in basic kind of ideas, and how we can utilize this at work or at home with kids, with spouse, with colleagues and co-founders and investors. And I think it's really, really a good book to better understand why we behave sometimes in the way we behave. And then last but not least, if I think about it, there is a book called Range by David Epstein, basically talking about specialists and generalists and how they can support each other and why neither nor is better. And I think it's good for founders who have to hire a lot to understand whom to put in place when. And a book I absolutely love is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willing. He's ex-Navy SEAL, and he talks about leadership as well, leadership in extreme situations. He has a big podcast as well. He wrote kids' books that are bestsellers. So he's also just a great person who is who provides very applicable ideas, solutions, tactics to problems that we face in high stress situations. There you go. That's a list.
That is quite the list, and I definitely agree with you on long form podcasts, especially long form podcasts that aren't exactly about what you do for a living. I think
Yeah.
it's great to help you disengage and think about the larger
Yeah.
picture. So yeah, I'll make sure I put all of what you said in the show notes and as links in our blog. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time out, and thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolutely enlightening conversation, and I can't wait for readers to check it out, for listeners to listen to it, share their feedback, and hopefully join us on another episode soon. And Alex, I hope to cross paths with you again. I know we've already crossed paths a couple of times, so this
We
will keep
will. The
happening.
world is small. Thank
Absolutely.
you very much for inviting me. It was a great conversation. I love it. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
All right. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.